This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist and an empowerment coach for women. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now here is today's episode. Episode 84. And before we dive into today's episode, I invite you to go out to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/assessment and see if perfectionism is holding you back. No, this assessment is not a psychological test or anything like that, but it does give you an idea about whether or not some perfectionist thinking or behaving is holding you back in your life. So go out to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/assessment and see where you stand. All right, here is today's episode. Well, welcome, sisters. I'm excited about this next conversation. I know. I say that every single time I have a guest on, but I seriously am. I love these topics that I'm covering and the guests that I'm having on. And today, my guest is Joann Bagshaw, and she is a PhD and an award-winning professor of psychology and women's studies at Montgomery College. She is also an AASECT, which is a certified sex therapist with a private practice in Maryland, and she is the author of the Feminist Handbook, Practical Tools to Resist Sexism and Dismantle the Patriarchy, which we're going to talk about today. She also writes the popular feminist blog, The Third Wave for Psychology Today. Before re-specializing as a sex and relationship therapist, Joann was a trauma therapist, working primarily with rape and sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and adults who were abused as children. Joann brings her nearly 2 decades of experience as a therapist to help clients transform their relationships and lead happier and healthier lives. So, Joann, I know one of the main reasons I was sharing with you before I hit record that I wanted you on today is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood is all about women. It's about women. It's about supporting women, one another in the world. And I think your book does a beautiful job of raising awareness of these different isms and discrimination, all of this. And so I really appreciate you coming on. And I know so many of my clients that I've worked with over the years have experienced a lot of the trauma you talk about in your bio, and that they've also there's been a lot of sexual harassment at work. So again, I just want to say thank you so much for being on today, and start out with asking, why did you write this feminist handbook?
Great. Well, hi, Nicole, and thank you for having me. And hello, sisters who are listening. So I wrote this book. It really came a lot from obviously my personal experience as a woman in the world, but also my experience as a therapist. And I've worked with many women throughout my almost 2 decades of clinical experience at different developmental stages in their life, and different experiences coming in. And all women that I've worked with have really questioned what's wrong with them in a way that I've never heard men do the same.
Yeah.
You know, one of my sayings that is actually in the book is, it's not you, it's the patriarchy.
Yes.
And I really hope that readers read the book and take from the message from this book to separate themselves and their experiences from the way that they've been conditioned to think of themselves, living in a patriarchal society. And a patriarchal society just means that we live in a male-identified society, a male-dominated society. You know, patriarchy isn't a man or a room full of men. Women participate in patriarchy as well. But we get messages that there's something wrong with us, particularly around mental health. And women are overrepresented in diagnoses of PTSD, primarily because we experience the kinds of trauma that cause PTSD, rape and sexual assault, intimate partner violence.
Yes.
Also anxiety, eating disorders, depression, and many of the situations or the life experiences that trigger being diagnosed with a mental illness are due to sexism.
Yeah.
And so now we're told, well, it's not really a sexist society. It's because you have a mental disorder, or minimizing our
Yeah.
experience, and it's really infuriating. It's gaslighting.
Yes. Speak a little bit more about that. I know you have that in the book too, and I think I've talked about it in different episodes, not so specifically, but share just a little bit. What do you mean by gaslighting? What's that definition?
Yeah, so and that word is being thrown around a lot.
Yes, it is.
So it comes from an older movie, which I have to admit I never watched.
Yeah.
But I will reference. I don't even remember the decade. 1940s, 1950s.
Something way back. Yeah.
Exactly, a long time ago, black and white film, I think.
Yes, it was. Yep.
And the husband wanted to make his wife feel crazy, so he would, like put tape recordings in the walls that would make sounds and things like that, and make sounds around the house. And she would say, "Oh, do you hear that noise?" And he'd say, "What noise?" So eventually she lost contact with reality, and in the film went quote unquote crazy. So today, what we mean by that is when somebody distorts your reality, intentionally distorts your reality. And sometimes people can sort of gaslight, not know that they're doing it. And I certainly want to allow for that. And those are people that you can talk to and say, hey, that was a little gaslighty. And they'll be like, oh, I didn't know. But then there are people who are highly manipulative, who are more predatory, and are intentionally trying to make you question your reality and what's real.
I think that really goes a lot into the segue too. And I want to come back to defining feminism too in here. But the segue of, again, a lot of the women I've worked with over the years, and they've been in various professions where the sexism stuff happens, sexual harassment happens in the office. And oftentimes they're left kind of questioning, like, did that just actually happen? Wait, maybe I'm overthinking it. Oh, wait, did that really? And it's like, no, that was not okay. And that's harassment. That is so not okay.
That's exactly right. And, I'll see these women, in my life or as clients. And, part of their questioning is living in this culture where we're constantly told, hey, it's not that bad.
Yes.
You have it so much better than women in this other country. But look at the rights that you have. Like, it's not, just smile and
right.
And,
be grateful.
And be grateful for everything that you have. But in reality, in our country, 1 out of 5 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and I'm sorry, 1 out of 3 women will be raped. So those are extraordinarily high statistics. That we are have threats of violence around us that are real, and we alter our lives around those sorts of violence. So to be told, hey, so what when guys catcall you on the street? Or what's the big deal if your male supervisor constantly comments on your legs or your appearance? He's just joking. He's just a nice guy.
Right.
But, we don't know that. We don't know, and this is the thing that I think needs to be talked about a lot, is that whether someone is complimenting us in the street or calling out to us or telling us it's pretty or we're pretty or whatever, we never know how we can react to that situation. So if we yell back, hey, shut up, F you, we might get assaulted.
Right.
We smile, we might be followed home.
Yep.
So we never know. So it's really anxiety producing.
Yeah.
So to be told like, oh, what's the big deal? Just dismiss it. Of course we think that because we're constantly told that.
And you call a lot of this stuff too. I was making some notes before the conversation today, that there's a lot of microaggressions, like you're talking about it. Oh, that's a nice outfit. Oh, great legs. All these little things, like you're saying, that happen over time, which increase a lot of the mental health issues, whether it's anxiety or depression or even truly PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's because it happens over and over and over, and sometimes subtle versus the overt. And it's like, well, I don't understand what's going on. And maybe I do. I'm just overreacting. And I know for many of my listeners who are highly sensitive people, we're already told we're too sensitive, we're too this. It's like, oh, just add another layer, please.
That's right. Usually when we're told we're too sensitive, it's because someone is not being nice and does not want to take responsibility for it. Yeah. But, microaggressions are like death by 1,000 cuts. And, I do want to acknowledge that there's some research that suggests that some people might be more affected by microaggressions than others. That's
Correct.
totally fair. But the point is, it's not just one comment in your life. For example, when I teach women's studies, which is usually a predominantly female class, maybe one guy, two brave souls in the class, I'll always ask at some point in the semester, how many of you have been told by a stranger that you should be smiling? Every single woman in the class raises her hand, and the men are baffled. They're like, wait, why are you, what? Like, and so I asked them, has anyone ever told you to smile? And no, so it's being told to smile is a microaggression, that we're supposed to be pretty, we're supposed to be nice, we're supposed to be friendly. And we all get it. And it's over time, and it's many, many instances of microaggressions. And a microaggression in itself doesn't cause mental illness, but what it does cause is stress.
Yeah.
It's another stressor. And certainly stress is related to anxiety and depression and obviously PTSD.
And you talk about in your book too, I don't want to minimize this in any way, shape, or form, because it's a heavy topic. Yet, as you go through the book, I mean, one, you've got great questions in there to just raise awareness. Like I said earlier, like, have you ever experienced this? What do you think about this? And you start to challenge some of these mindsets or belief systems that we might have grown up with or know about or don't even know about or recognize. And then at the end of the book, or towards the middle of it, towards the end too, that, you talk about ways to be resilient and the mindfulness and the meditations and self-care. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit because I just love the title of that chapter, what you represent. I say it so often in this podcast, but it's looking at just, challenging some of these things so that if you're recognizing it, ongoing stress, that it doesn't lead into more what I call severe mental health issues, which again, the generalized anxiety disorders, the major depression, things like that. That's like, let's reverse some of these things. Because it is so prevalent, very, very prevalent.
Obviously with the high rates of mental health issues that women are diagnosed with, stress and the stress of sexism plays a major role.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. And whether it's how you perform or how you look or this or that, and it's like, seriously? And you gave so many beautiful real life examples of women going through or have gone through or experienced different things. And I know I've got clients, getting pregnant, are pregnant, wanting to maybe change jobs, and that whole issue that comes up. Like, oh yeah, we've got laws that are passing, we can, but no, you really can't. Sorry.
Exactly. Right. The law says we can't discriminate against you, but we're going to find a way. Yeah.
Yep.
And that is absolutely represented in the amounts of cases of pregnancy discrimination. So, and I think maybe the other aspect of the book that, for someone that's new to really looking at feminism and the effects of sexism is that there are so many different ways to experience sexism.
Yes.
From slut shaming, microaggressions, rape, and threats of rape and sexual assault, actual violence, reproductive rights, reproductive freedom and health. It comes at us from all different directions. So wage gap, pregnancy discrimination at work, etc.
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up. I know one thing that struck out to me that I think this book not only needs to be in all high schools, I think it needs to actually start at middle schools, because I also work with teen girls in my therapy practice. And often we will have conversations when they are trying to actually slut shame another girl. And I'm like, no, that's not allowed in here.
Right. Great.
And they're
Absolutely.
like, what?
Yeah.
Why are you offended, Nicole? And I'm like, here's why. And I list all these reasons, and they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Exactly. I've done the same with my daughter and her friends.
Because it's breaking through these conditions and saying we're not going to continue to pass this on from generation to generation. It needs to end.
Yeah.
I love that.
Absolutely agreed. Mm-hmm.
So I want to now go backward. I want you to then share what your definition that you're using of feminism. And oh my gosh, I've heard so many distorted
Oh, yeah.
views of what feminism is. So share what your definition is that you're using and some of the myths maybe that are around it.
Sure. So anti-feminists,
Mhm.
anybody against feminism, has done such a great job of distorting this movement.
Yeah.
And, some of the myths are benign, like the common understanding of feminism as being women wanting equal rights with men.
Hmm.
And that's not an accurate definition of feminism. That is because not all men have equal access to power and privilege. So, who would we be equal to? So,
Yes.
if we look in our culture, who has which men have the most power and privilege? They are white men, cisgender men whose sex identified at birth and gender identity match,
Hmm.
heterosexual,
Hmm.
middle-aged,
Hmm.
educated.
Uh-huh.
so so those are the men with the who are political leaders. They are the men with the most amount of social power.
Hmm.
So if we were to be equal to them, that means that we have to now oppress other groups to get there.
Yes.
And this is and has been a major flaw of the feminist movement in terms of white women who were leading the movement. And I wrote about that in the
Hmm.
book,
Yes.
identifying equality with being equal to white men.
Yeah.
But to do that, that means we're stepping on other groups. We are oppressing other groups. So really, feminism is dismantling all interlocking systems of oppression. So we're not just looking to be equal to men. We're looking to get rid of that hierarchy. We're also
Hmm.
you need to dismantle white supremacy,
Hmm.
heterosexism,
Hmm.
classism,
Hmm.
etc. Any kind of systemic group that maintains a hierarchy in our culture.
Yeah, and I love that definition because that's the view I have. I don't know where I actually got it from, but it's the inclusion.
Hmm.
And it's not just like I'm equal to, yeah, because I'm just like, I don't understand that. And I remember telling clients as through some of these movements, and just like, if we all came together, we'd be incredibly powerful. I mean, all the different movements coming together instead of like, well, my group is a little better than yours, or no, your group doesn't do this.
Yeah.
There's still the pitting. And I'm like, but if we're all together, you can't stop us.
I know. And this is why the anti-feminists have been so successful,
Mm-hmm.
because they are spreading all of this, these negative stereotypes and propaganda about
Yeah.
feminists, so groups are fighting with different groups. But as a white woman, I have to say to other white women, we really need to work together to get on board to help all women.
Yes.
That we're not just fighting for our rights. We're fighting for all women's rights. We're fighting for everyone's rights.
Yeah.
Because if we don't do that, then we're just sort of centering, our own needs. And we have a lot of privilege.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I go through that very carefully in the book. That's another term
Yes.
that people are very confused about.
Yep.
Because if you read the internet, like we all do, the people who are, sort of anti-social justice are putting out videos and things about what privilege is, but no one's listening to people who are actually talking, accurately about privilege. But
Mm-hmm.
privilege does not mean that you've had an easy life.
Correct.
And I don't know anyone that has an easy life.
Mm-mm.
So privilege means that you don't have to experience certain things, or that you are entitled to some expectations about how you're going to be treated in ways that you didn't even earn.
Yeah.
So, so I myself have not had a perfect life. I've had my own struggles, but I'm a white woman who did not have to also go through those struggles and experience racism.
Correct.
That gives me racial privilege. I grew up in an upper middle class family. That gives me class privilege. I'm very educated. That's more class privilege. So, if I didn't have those things, and, my experiences will have been compounded and harder.
Mm-hmm.
It's like multiple forms of oppression.
Yeah. And again, I like that you do break that down in the book. So it is looking at that. And I remember in grad school, we had some conversations around privilege through cultural awareness training and stuff. And there was stuff before I entered it, I'm like, what? Oh, never
Yeah.
really thought of that. Right. Cause it's just, oh, this is just how it is. It's like not for everybody. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. I now have a much better understanding what privilege is. And yes, as a white woman, I absolutely have different privileges. Yeah.
Yes. And it is baffling to me why that's so hard for people to acknowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I also say this in the book, we can't get rid of our privilege. That's
Correct.
ridiculous. How could we even do that? Nor do we need to feel ashamed about it.
Right.
This is the life I have and I was born into,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we can use our privilege to help other people.
Yes,
Speaking out
absolutely.
on behalf of other groups that have less privilege, using our platform, writing books,
Yep.
etc. So
raise awareness, take action, raise
absolutely.
awareness.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, the other chapter that I wanted to circle back to is chapter 9, which is the self-care is an act of resistance. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely loved the title. So many of my episodes have something about self-care in it, but it's every single week. I don't know how many times per week when I talk about self-care with clients or friends or even looking at my own life, there's still such a stigma like that's being selfish. You can't do that. You're being self-indulgent. It's like, no, it is not.
I know.
And yeah, go ahead.
Again, and it's this gaslighting thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
women are supposed to be the caretakers of the world, so we're not supposed to, think about ourselves. Really good women, really good mothers should just always
Uh-huh.
put everyone else's needs first, and that just leads to burnout and
Mm-hmm.
resentment and I was going to say resistance, which is interesting. So yeah, I will say some resistance
Yeah. Yeah.
to wanting to be in that role. And I also think that what our culture has done has been to minimize self-care
Mm-hmm.
and to confuse sort of the wellness industry with self-care.
Yep.
Like I love the whole facial mask thing. And I love a good facial mask,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't change my life.
Right.
I don't think it does anything for my skin. If anything, it just gives me an opportunity to scare my husband when I come out of the bathroom with a face mask on. But what is good self-care that can help you change your life is setting boundaries,
Yes.
saying no,
Yes. Yeah.
saying what your limits are, what your time limits are, what you can and what you can't do,
Yep.
not being available to everyone,
Yep.
centering your own needs in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was careful in the book not to like when I don't want to say prioritize yourself like a hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
because women who are caretakers, who are parents or taking care of disabled family members, you can't always just put yourself first and say, oh, I'm not
Right.
doing that today.
Right.
Um, so it doesn't work that way. But if you can imagine yourself in the center of your own self, of your world, of people that needs to be taken care of,
Mm-hmm.
are your needs being met? Are you
Yeah.
getting enough rest? Are you eating well?
Yes.
Do you sleep? Are you having fun?
Mm-hmm.
Like no one talks about, well, not no one, but not a lot of people talk about fun or pleasure as self-care. And
Correct.
that is a really important aspect of self-care.
Well, when you think about that, the fun or playtime is more associated with children, and it's like as adults, though, it's okay to play. It's okay to have fun because that's also
Yes,
how you rejuvenate. That's also how you have those creative juices start to flow, and
absolutely.
yeah, it's part of your restoration.
Yeah. And as a sex therapist, I have to also say having sex is
Mm-hmm.
a form of adult play.
Yep.
And it's super, super important for you as an individual, for you if you're in a relationship, etc. So
Yeah.
there's all different ways that we can incorporate self-care in really meaningful ways that actually do change your life.
Mm-hmm. You've gone in here, and I know we're going to kind of bounce back and forth because I really wanted to talk about kind of the mental health piece of it. But I'm just looking through like the section here where we talk about even the household chores. There's still
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit in many studies, and you've stated this in the book too, but how women, even if they're in the outside workforce, they're still
Mm-hmm.
doing the majority of the home chores
I
versus
know.
men. And
Yes.
yeah, I have conversations with some of my clients. I'm like, and what's that about? And
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and we think about like the wage gap. There's a
Hmm.
wage gap. There's also a chore gap, and maybe they're related.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe and actually, it's not exactly a direct line there. The wage gap is, there are other funnels and avenues to where women are not being hired the same rates, promoted the same
Yes.
rates, etc. It's an entirely different sort of response.
Right.
But in terms of the stuff in the house, yeah, men today, and I'm talking about primarily heterosexual relationships here,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So men today do a lot more than their fathers did, our fathers did, grandfathers did, and
Hmm.
that's great. Good job, you
Yep.
know.
Hmm.
But wives and wives who are mothers are still doing more, putting in way more hours a week
Hmm.
in emotional labor, taking care of the family, checking in with everyone, meal planning,
Hmm.
taking care of the laundry, putting the kids to bed. Yeah, and as a couples counselor, I see the effects of that. Where what will happen is the couple will come in and they're not having sex,
Hmm.
and it's usually subtly blamed on her.
Yep.
They'll come in and say, "Well, we have mismatched desire. I want more sex than she does," and
She's exhausted.
he's
What do you
exhausted.
think?
Yeah. Yes. And so I've actually seen couples talk to them about, you just ask questions. Well,
Right.
what's your day like when you come home? And I hear that, well, she's getting dinner together while bathing the kids, and
Yeah.
he's checking up on Facebook.
Yep.
And then they get into bed and she's sound asleep and he has already rested, so um, he
Hmm.
is ready for sex, and she's not only just tired, she's resentful.
Oh, yeah.
But what's really interesting is that a lot of the women that I've worked with hesitate to complain.
Yep.
It's not like they're at home saying, I wish you'd do this, I wish you'd do that. In their mind, their husband's doing some stuff and he's a good guy and a good father, and
Uh-huh.
he does all this stuff, and I don't want to complain.
Yeah.
I don't, it's not fair. It's
Yeah.
not fair for me. He's tired. I'll take it on.
Uh-huh.
So, I have to counsel. It's not just telling the men you need to do this. It's
Right.
also counseling the women to say, you have boundaries and you
Yeah.
can't take it all on, and you don't need to.
Yeah, it's okay to ask for help. It's also okay to say,
Okay.
hey, wait a minute, you guys are in this together.
Yeah,
So it's not just you, it's on both
that's
of
right.
you.
And
Yeah.
in reality, most of the men that I've worked with really do want, a happy marriage and
Right.
whatever it takes, and are willing to change. And they are happy to please and to do more things around the house if she allows that to happen sometimes, by saying, and I don't mean you need to be a parent and say to your
Right. Right.
spouse,
No.
can you do this or that? But like, giving up your own idea that you have to be the caretaker of everything.
Yeah. Yep.
And part of that is intertwined in our culture where, if you're a mom, you do everything.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're not a good mom.
Yeah.
So part of it is a confusion of, well, if I don't drive 3 kids to 3 different places and get lunch and make perfect dinner, all these things, that I'm really not being a great mom.
And it's fascinating because I've literally had that type of conversation with many times over the years with women who are moms. And I'm like, where did that belief come from? Well, I saw it from my mom,
Yeah,
or I heard it in, this social group, or because of this. And I'm like, so is that your reality or their reality?
right.
And yeah, starting to just raise the awareness of like, instead of just following along, it's like, if it works for you, beautiful, but I'm hearing it's not. So
No,
what needs to
yeah.
shift? Yeah.
It doesn't work. And
Mm-mm.
when I work with same-sex couples, it's pretty interesting because, and the research supports this as well, but they do tend to, well, first of all, there are more conversations about who's going
Mm-hmm.
to do what.
Mm-hmm.
There's not an expectation, well, you're the man, you do this, you're the woman, you do that.
Yep.
It's more like, well, okay, my job makes more money, so and you don't like your job and you make
Mm-hmm.
less money, and you want to stay home, so how about you
Mm-hmm.
stay home and I'll go to work? Great. And so that's worked out based on who wants to do what. And then they take on, generally in happy relationships, I'm really generalizing here, but they take on what seems to be like traditional gender role stuff where the partner who's working, takes on all that role of the provider, and the partner who stays home takes on that role as the family caretaker. But what's interesting is that both roles are respected.
Yeah.
And the caretaker role in a heterosexual relationship isn't usually as respected.
No.
So yeah, and then that builds up resentment. But when you look at same-sex couples, and I did some focus groups with happy, satisfied same-sex couples, and what was really interesting was, when the provider comes home, the provider asks the partner, "Hey, it's been a long day for you at home. What do you need from me? What can I do for you?" And then the person at home is like, "Well, they've been out. My spouse has been out working all day. So when they come home, they're like, 'Well, what can I do for you? What do you need from me?'" And so both of them are really, looking out for each other, and both are being caretakers and really nurturing. And, but if you were to look at it from the outside, and I've seen research say this, that, well, same-sex couples also divide things in very traditional gender roles. So isn't that interesting? It must be the way things should be. But qualitatively, it doesn't
it's not.
have the same experience. Yeah.
Yeah, it is very different. It is fascinating. And I think, again, part of this is all about bringing this to the awareness so that each person can begin to take some action steps in raising that and changing that within their own home, which again will then impact the next generation.
Exactly.
So it's beautiful. And I would like, Joann, if you wouldn't mind, share some steps for women and I know you've talked about this in the book, but sharing how they can start to kind of, in a way, I want to say, disrupt some of the stuff that may happen with family, friends, or at the office. If there's some kind of this covert, passive crap about, how they look, or the sexism stuff that starts to happen, what are some things that they can do, steps they could possibly take to start to make some disruption with that?
Sure. So I think what you're asking is if, for women who are noticing the microaggressions, basically.
Yes.
So there are a number of ways that you can handle that. And always seems like ideally to handle it in the moment, but in reality, it doesn't always work that way.
Correct.
So the first thing I want to say is to give women permission to go back home, think about it, talk about it, and come back and bring it up with someone, because that's in reality what most people's lives are like. We're not, it's not like you just have it all figured out. You just don't know what to say.
Right.
But you certainly can say things in the moment. A really good thing is to say, ouch.
Yeah.
When someone says something about your weight or some comments about
that
smiling.
color on you doesn't look good today.
Yeah. Ouch. That's effective. And you can say that to anyone, right? I mean, you could even say that to a supervisor. Yep. It's not over the top aggressive. You can also say things, and I talk about cognitive distortions in the book, but you can also say things like, "Oh, I'm surprised to hear you say something like that." And it makes people stop and think about, well, wait, what am I saying? No one likes to be sort of called out on things. Right. And what I mean by call out, I don't mean like yelling at people either. That stuff is like usually reserved for online.
Right. But you're talking about it's holding them accountable.
Absolutely.
For what they just said.
Yeah. Like, and making them a little, uncomfortable and reflecting on, on what they said and the impact of what they said.
Yes.
And, so when somebody says, well, you're sensitive today. No, I don't feel like I'm being sensitive at all.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit, it's just like just enough, and I'm saying this because I'm assuming these are situations where one has to be cautious. Yes. About, what you're going to say. And then say you come home from work and something just wasn't sitting right with you all day. I always say check in with the people around you that you can really trust to support your reality, and just check in and say, this person said this, is sitting with me, and I don't know, what do you think? And get some feedback, not from toxic people.
Correct.
But accurate feedback, so that what will happen is you should be validated, because generally speaking, when you're coming back and thinking, I don't know, was that sexist? It probably was. So you can go back to that person later and say, hey, at some other time, of course, if there's a wide variety in responses depending on who the person is.
Correct.
You can make a date to talk to that person. You can go right back to them, whatever it is. But just to start off with, I've been thinking, there was something that in our last conversation that has been playing over in my mind. I just want to talk to you about it. When you said blah, 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 I felt blah, blah, blah. And, sometimes people say these things and they don't really know,
Right.
I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt. Then there are times that there is, somebody's intention is not good, right? This is somebody who's demeaning, who is hostile, whether it's towards your gender identity, your race, whatever, sexual orientation. That this person has some underlying hostility, and depending on how much power they have over you, you might need to be really careful how you address it. And,
correct.
Certainly in some instances you might not say anything and maybe just look for another job, right? Or really just setting boundaries. Setting boundaries with your time, with your resources, with the energy and emotional energy that you give away in this dynamic, whatever it is. But in that case, probably a confrontation is not going to be helpful, but setting boundaries that protect yourself and doing that self-care stuff. And self-care also means finding a community, being part of a community of people who are like you, who support you, and getting support from them.
Yeah. Well, and I'm gonna piggyback on to that too, because so much of it, like you're saying, if it really is if they're an unsafe person, it's like escalating it for them, meaning you're just trying to assert yourself is not a bad thing. But if they're going to escalate and put you literally in harm's way, it's like, no, you've got to look for alternate ways. Because again, it's just part of how we literally have shifted our lives. And you've talked about that so much book. There's times I've even worked with teen girls where sometimes people in their lives, adults in their lives, whether it's school functions or other functions outside of school, where they're even afraid of some of these adults due to their very aggressive behaviors.
I know.
And I will tell them, I'm like, all right, you've done X, Y, and Z, whether they've told their parents, maybe they've actually, said something to other school staff. I said, but then you're just not going to be around them by yourself. That's a non-negotiable.
Exactly. Yep.
So
perfect.
So it's the same thing as an adult. If there is somebody that makes you nervous, pay attention to that and don't go there by yourself, or, schedule like, oh, we can do a phone conversation instead. Something that doesn't put you necessarily in front of them.
Absolutely. Trusting your intuition. And safety, not feeling safe could be, a real or perceived physical safety, but also like if it's you're losing your job, that's a safety issue. Your family relies on your income. So, in those sorts of cases, you really have to prioritize your safety, and being confrontational for the resistance is not necessary. You want to look out for yourself, but make sure that you're getting good self-care.
Correct. And I know in the back of the book too, when you talk about this self-care and then becoming active in it too, you've given a list of various places that you can get involved in and join and be part of, which is awesome. That you've given those references. That's the word I was looking for. References for us to go into. And ladies, again, I'm not done yet, but I'm going to have Joann's information in her book and all that good stuff on the show notes as well. So that you can go out and look for that as we're talking about these things. So, Joann, I want to pivot just a quick little second here before we do wrap up, because again, there's so much depth that we could go into today. But I also want to make sure our listeners are like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. Share just a little bit about somebody who's been an influence on you, somebody who's inspired you or influenced you throughout all of this, or maybe even somebody just recently, I don't know, but who's influenced you?
I think that the honest answer is actually my grandmother, who isn't alive anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was adopted,
Mm-hmm.
and she was my adoptive dad, but he was my dad, right?
Uh-huh.
His
Okay.
mother, and she was a teacher, and she brought me to the library when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time. No one else had really introduced me to books so much. I mean, I'm sure my parents read to me, but I think that had such an influence
Yeah.
over my whole future development. I grew up in a working class area. My adoptive parents didn't go to college, and as an adoptee, really figuring out who I am and my identity, it took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And she really helped get me on that path of, I actually am an academic. I
Mm-hmm.
am an intellectual. I cannot stop reading, even today. Obsessively reading. But, she really just opened that door for me and sort of exposed me to a part of myself that, probably would have taken longer for me to get to.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
Thank
That
you.
is incredible. Yeah. Well, is there anything, again, before I wrap up, is there anything that I've missed talking about today that you wanted to kind of bring up that I forgot to ask or didn't ask?
The only thing I would say is that if women as a group weren't so busy trying to fix ourselves
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
through wellness and medication and yoga and all these things, right? If we
Mm-hmm.
just, and I'm not saying any of those things are inherently wrong, but
Correct.
the idea is if we weren't just trying to fix ourselves, we'd have all this other energy to do
Mm-hmm.
what? To change the world,
Yeah.
right? To
Right.
so that's, after all this inner work and deconditioning about the way we learned about ourselves in a patriarchal society, once we've done that, now we have all this extra energy to work as a collective movement. And
Mm-hmm.
that is the point of the resources at the end of the book, is because I want readers to then go get involved
Yeah.
in your community, go help people,
Yep.
change things, change the system.
And I was literally just had a conversation earlier about the kind of the grassroots it's the local stuff. It's like
Yeah,
the change really does happen right where you are.
absolutely.
It doesn't need to happen, a whole country away or a state away or wherever. It's like it can happen right there in your community. So I so appreciate, again, you giving those resources available in the back so that women can look at this. And I think you've hit it too. It's so much of what I hear from the women that I work with, right, is there's so much perfectionism thinking that's going on and the people pleasing. And it's like, as you start to bust through those old belief systems, energy is just, it's like, boom, you've got so much more because emotionally you're feeling more free, more in tune to who you truly are at a core soul self. And that you're just like, oh, I have the ability to do this. It's not about perfection in every area of my life because that's a false belief.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, ladies, to find out more about Joann, you can go out to her website. Again, I'm going to have it in the show notes. It's joannbagshaw.com, all one word. She's also on Instagram. And again, I'm going to have that link under the social media area as well. So, Joann, I just want to say thank you so much, first and foremost, for actually writing the book, having conversations about this topic, and helping women and men begin to really shift their viewpoint of what feminism is and isn't. Because I know that propaganda, like you talked about, is so vast and all over, and it needs to be dismantled.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. Curious about where you stand in perfectionism? Head over to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/assessment. Take that short little assessment that I've created just for you and see how you do. No right or wrong, just an assessment. Take care.